Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Kazerman, Vice President of Government Relations at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to IssuesWatch Live. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into several components of Governor Murphy's proposed budget for New Jersey's 2024 fiscal year, which he released on February 28th. The legislature is in the process of reviewing it, and a final budget has to be signed by June 30th. To get us started, here are some budget highlights. The proposed budget is $53.1 billion, an increase of about 5% from the FY23 budget. It projects $3.7 billion in revenues over what was originally projected for fiscal 23. The budget proposal includes no new taxes, yay, and it sunsets the 2.5% corporate business tax surcharge, taking us from a 2023 CBT rate of 11.5%, the highest in the nation, to 9%, which is expected to be the fourth highest in the nation. It includes a full payment of $7.1 billion to the Public Workers Pension Fund. It includes $2.35 billion for the Debt Defeasance Fund, which will bring that to a three-year total of $11 billion. There's a $10 billion surplus. There is a continuation of the Anchor Property Tax Relief Program, which will cost $2 billion, the same as this year. There's a doubling of the child tax credit for certain low-income families. There's an expansion of the Senior Freeze Property Tax Relief Program, with the eligibility limit being raised from $100,000 to $150,000. Direct school aid will increase $832 million. School funding actually comes to about $20 billion when you consider indirect state funding, such as paying for part of teachers' pensions. And this is the last one. Municipal aid is close to flat at just under $1.6 billion. So let me tell you about our recent survey. We surveyed our members and about the proposed budget, and 58% said that the proposed budget would make the economy worse over the long run. 22% said the economy will stay the same, and only 20% felt that it would improve the economy. To address what all this means for New Jersey, I'm joined today by Dale Florio of Princeton Public Affairs. We were having some technology problems, so we only have him via audio, but you've all seen him before if you've ever tuned into this. Dale is considered one of the top lobbyists in New Jersey and has worked on behalf of the NJCPA for years. Welcome, Dale.
Good to be with you, Jeff.
I'm also joined by Richard Keevy, Distinguished Executive in Residence at the Rutgers School of Planning and Public Policy, and a lecturer at Princeton University. Rich brings a unique perspective, having served as New Jersey's budget director and comptroller under two different governors from each political party. Welcome, Rich.
Good to be here.
So, Rich and Dale, let's start with your overall impression of the proposed budget. Is this a good budget, bad budget, somewhere in between? Rich, what do you think?
I think it's an excellent budget. You covered a lot of the highlights, and I wrote down a little guidance to myself about 21 good things that I thought I saw in the budget. Let me cover a couple of them, some of which you've covered. We obviously have a balanced budget. The appropriations do not exceed the expected revenues. We have plenty of surplus, which I think is a very good idea. We have, I would say, very modest increase in spending. I heard your numbers, but I would correct that a little bit. We basically are a flat budget compared to the current appropriation level. And I think the revenue estimates are very, very responsible. If anything, they're probably underestimating what I would have projected. So it's a really sound technical budget in terms of surpluses and growth and comprehensiveness of it. And a couple of the main things that I think the governor emphasized, you sort of covered. Property tax relief, that $2 billion for the anchor program. We can talk a little later about whether that's the best way to give property tax relief. And we expanded the senior freeze program, extensive support for K through 12 education, including all of the monies that go to school districts, over $1 billion increase, of which about $350 million is for the funding of the pension and health care for retirees. Increase for student assistance at the colleges, a continuation and expansion of what I think is an excellent Medicaid program for the state, and the corporate tax cut of 2.5%. So if you roll all those things together, dominated by, a very balanced budget, probably even better than what's on paper based upon revenue estimates, I would give it at least an A- for the governor on this budget. It is a well-structured budget in terms of fiscal sanity, in my opinion.
Let me just throw my 2 cents in. I agree with you, Rich. Dale, what's your overall impression?
Well, I always look at things through a political lens. Jeff, I guess that's my role as part of the program here today. And, it's a good election year budget for the legislature to run on. What do they say? It's better to be lucky than good. This governor has been tremendously lucky with the environment relative to generating revenue. You can never say that anybody was lucky having to work through the pandemic, but with the pandemic came a lot of unexpected support from the federal government. It also, unsurprisingly, created huge increases in just all our revenue streams. The economy was doing fine. And we also bonded, right? We talked about this last year on this program. The state also, in anticipation of a downturn relative to the pandemic, went out and generated bonds for revenue purposes. So when you put all that together, there's a lot of money there that, depending on where you sit, you either want to spend it or give some of it back. The governor has given some of it back to targeted constituencies. And now that he's got a corporate tax ready to sunset, I know he proposed it, but key members of the legislature had told him that they weren't going to support a continuation of it. But he's taking the victory lap on that. Senator Sarlo, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, said that he was not going to support continuation. So very lucky. I think one of the things, maybe we'll talk about it a little bit more, the concern by members of both political parties, these things go in cycles, right? We're in the good times in terms of revenues. The economy is so-so. But when does that cliff hit? And I'll be anxious to hear what Rich has to say later in the program. But that's the concern, and that's also the concern with the governor creating new programs that might not be sustainable in the future. Certainly after he's not the governor anymore. But that's what it's been his turn. It'll be his turn for another 2.5 years, and we'll have to see what the future holds. But the question always being asked around the State House is, where is that fiscal cliff? When are we going to get there?
Right. If Anchor is still around 3 years from now, I'll have a heart attack. It'll be a good thing, but okay. So, in his recent address, the governor talked about fiscal responsibility and preparing for an economic downturn, just as you were talking about, Dale. So let's watch a clip of this, what he had to say.
This entire budget is purpose-built to help you find your place in the next New Jersey by securing your place in the New Jersey of right now. Indeed, this is a budget focused on the pocketbooks of our families. It provides more direct tax relief to help folks out from under stubborn inflation, which makes it so hard to cover the basics. And with this budget, we will, all of us together, will have cut taxes for our working and middle-class families and our seniors a total of 18 times since we began working together in 2018. 18 tax cuts. Further, this budget will help insulate our state for uncertain economic times. None of us hopes for an economic downturn, that's for sure. But should one occur, we will be on a far stronger footing to react in real time to ensure that critical investments can continue, that our economy can be backstopped, and that vital safety nets can be quickly put up so no one falls through the cracks.
That was great. So I heard a leader in the business community say that this is a structurally sound budget where the money coming in from recurring revenues equals spending, and there are no budget gimmicks. Dale, what's your reaction to that statement? And basically, overall what the governor just said. What do you think?
Well, again, better to be lucky than good, and he's been lucky here, right? When you can match your expenditures with your recurring revenues. At the same time, there's a lot of money off to the side that hasn't been spent yet. So, the question always asked is why aren't you using that money to maybe give something back to everybody? I mean, I think you probably have three cynics on the program here today about the anchor program. I think we started it with Governor Byrne, and we continue to make people feel like they're getting money back that was in fact their money. So, and they've raised it to an amount that's not going to be sustainable in years to come. So. Again, kudos to the administration for being able to make this happen this time around. The question is, where are the other billions of dollars that are off to the side that aren't being utilized? And I think that's the concern many people have.
Thanks, Dale. Rich, the Sweeney Center for Public Policy's multi-year budget work group, and that's a mouthful, which you sit on, issued a report in 2022 that raised concerns about the multi-year fiscal health of New Jersey in the face of a possible, as Dale was just saying, in the face of a possible recession and the end of billions of federal COVID aid. Does this budget address those concerns, in your opinion?
To a large extent, actually, in my opinion, it does. A little bit of background. Most states, I don't know any state that does, do not project a current services budget out for 3 or 4 or 5 years. Ideally, when the governor submits a budget, he should also attach some supplementary information, a current services projection. In other words, if we continue to fund the programs that we're now doing and assuming different options for revenues, what does the budget look like 3 or 4 years from now? To my knowledge, no state does it. Every state should. I remember from my experiences, we always did it internally in the budget office. So we kind of knew where we were going in the long run, but no governor ever wanted to make it public. To Sweeney's credit, he produced a current services budget. A group of us worked on it, from people all over the state, all over the country actually participated. And their projections suggested they did 3 different scenarios. Scenario says, let's have a baseline projection of revenue, no change in structure, just a modest increase. What happens if we have a pessimistic scenario? And what happens if we have an optimistic scenario? Let me just pick at the baseline. In other words, if the revenue comes in the same type of way in which it has been coming in, can we sustain this budget? And the projection said, yes, we'll be able to sustain it through fiscal 2027. So think about that. Given the current environment and given current estimates for revenue structure and the economy and current programs, we have sufficient surpluses that we've accumulated that we'll spend down over a period of time, but we will submit a balanced budget through the year 2027. If you looked at pessimistic projections, we would run into a big problem somewhere around latter part of 2025. And if you projected an optimistic scenario, we would be flush for the next 4 or 5 years. So take your choice. My choice would be, let's take at least the baseline and beware that maybe there's some bad things lying out there. They always got to be thinking about what does this current budget do to the next year. So far, I would say, given the current environment, we look pretty good for a couple of years. And some people take the other approach and say, well, all things could go wrong. Correct. And we would have to make adjustments. One other point, 2 other points. An obvious solution, if that's the right word, if we get into a very pessimistic scenario, then the easy cut is $2 billion of a homestead rebate or an anchor program. And now people would say, well, there must be other areas where you could cut. My view would be that, well, that's a discretionary fund of money. We don't need that to provide critical assistance to the people in the state. It's the good thing to do. I might have done it differently, but it's a good thing. So let me stop there. That's my 2 cents. Although I like one other point. Dale kind of referenced it. A couple of years ago, the governor did issue bonds for operating purposes. Not a good idea. And as it turns out, we didn't need to do it. Now, his approach to that was, well, we're going to defease a like amount of bonds in the long run, and things will work out the same. And that's probably true, but we should never have issued bonds in the first place. We've never done it in the past where we issued bonds for operating purposes. Bonds in state government should only be for capital. Anyway, I think things don't look too bad, quite frankly, looking out for the next couple of years. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Rich. Next question. Republicans and the business community generally say, or what you hear from them a lot, is that the 53% hike in the proposed budget, when you compare it to the last Governor Christie budget 6 years ago, that this indicates reckless spending. However, my understanding is about half of that increase has gone to paying the state's pension obligation and property tax relief. So, Dale, what do you think? Is this charge of out-of-control spending really off base when you consider that?
Well, Jeff, as I said before, it's a matter of, it's politics, right? Republicans would say, cut my income taxes, or, corporations would say, let's lower the corporate tax. But on the flip side of that, no politician likes to, they like things steady, right? They don't like to see revenues go up and down, and then have to, depending on the budget year, maybe have to raise taxes to get a little bit more. So that's always the political dilemma. I think the problem with the growth in the budget are the programs, again, that have reached high levels of funding, and whether or not you can sustain those levels. I mean, I think the 2 big issues that this budget does address, which are good things, and you just referenced it, that's the try to fix the mistakes that we've made for decades in terms of how we fund our pension, right? So the governor has taken advantage of these numbers, revenue numbers, to put significant payments into the pension program. And then the other thing that Rich mentioned earlier, and this is always the third rail in politics, and that's education funding. I mean, there is no more important issue that really gets to Main Street that people really focus on, that they understand, and that's, is my school getting enough money? Is my child getting what my child needs in my schools? And you can see that by the fact the governor put more money into the school budget through the school budget formula but yet 150 schools still came out losing money. And so yesterday, the legislature started the process of adding another 100 million plus in a separate bill, with the idea that those schools that were losing money, would get more money. So the politics of the situation dictate that was the case. What needs to be changed in this regard is that we need a new school funding formula, as opposed to using the old formula that doesn't address current needs.
Right, and we'll actually, I have that as a question later on. Rich, your thoughts about these, allegations that this budget and the last few have been, reckless in its spending, even though, unless I'm wrong, about half has gone to the pension obligations, which I think is fiscally irresponsible. And school aid is always a good thing, I guess. So what do you think? Are they off base?
I think so. A couple points. I don't disagree with anything that Gail observed about it. But what drove those big increases was sort of what you suggested. One, the pension system was severely underfunded. That in the long run would create, depends upon how you view it, big problems. Number two, so we put a lot of money into that. Number two, the governor decided he wanted to give property tax relief. So we have now in this current budget and the months before, putting them both together, $3.5 to $4 billion into property tax relief. That's sort of a tax cut. People might argue and present it in a different way and say, well, you should have cut the income tax instead of doing this one. The governor decided he was going to give property tax relief in that mode. And another observation, 75% of the current budget spending is either state aid, money that goes to school districts and municipalities or counties, or property tax relief, or grants that the state sends out to other groups, doesn't keep within the state budget. For example, we have a very robust and big Medicaid program. That money is not spent by the state per se. It goes to reimburse nursing homes, doctors, pharmacies, hospitals. And we have a large sum of money that goes to a higher education environment, and education and money that goes to the New Jersey transit subsidies. So a lot of the money is leaving the state government to provide assistance in those areas. Now, other people might argue about those programs. I think they're worthwhile funding. So if you put all those things together, I might put a different spin on it and not say this was a gross increase in spending. We did we did a little bit of the corp tax, significant amount of money to do this. Revenue growth was strong in the state, unexpectedly strong, particularly with the income tax. So I'm a little bit on the side of the governor on this in terms of where he has been spending the money. He did the responsible thing for pensions. He's trying to do the responsible thing for property tax relief. Based upon your comments or my comments, you probably realize that I'm slightly left of center. I'm not on that right side of the equation. And therefore, I think the majority of the programs are well funded.
Okay, thanks, Rich. So during COVID, we have a question from our audience. Do either of you know, during COVID, how much total debt has the state defeased versus how much was borrowed?
Well, I think I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I think we borrowed either $4 billion or $4.5 billion, something like that.
That's right.
And to date, I think we've actually defeased about $2.5 billion. There's another $2.5 billion that was put aside in the budget in the current year. And I think the total amount that I understand is close to $10 billion that has either been put into the defeasement account or has already been done. So in the long run, it looks like we're going to defease more bonds than we borrowed. We could discuss about, whether that's the best approach to do. Maybe using that defeased money that is going to decrease bonds, maybe we should have used it for tax relief. So it's a different viewpoint. The governor's decision was, I'm going to defease bonds and reduce the overall debt of the state and therefore the current interest payments on that. But that's my take on the bonds that were issued versus what will be defeased. I hope I didn't confuse you.
No, I got that. I mean, one could argue, if I'm following you, that, or in my opinion, that, okay, so we borrowed $4 billion, which it turns out we didn't need, but in effect, we put it into the defeasance fund, which is fiscally responsible. Would you agree with that, Rich?
I would buy that, at least equal to what was sold. We're going to go beyond that. We're going to defease more bonds than what we issued to balance the budget one year. And
right. Okay, so moving along, it appears to me, at least, that the governor is moving somewhat to the right on business issues. For example, as we discussed, he's letting the CBT surcharge expire, which will cost the state a lot of money. About $300 million in fiscal year 24 and $1 billion in fiscal year 25. So let's hear what he had to say about that. Let's go to the video.
This budget will allow the temporary 2.5% corporate business tax surcharge to expire. We hear from the business community that allowing this surcharge to lapse will mean more money for them to create jobs, to invest in new and more efficient equipment, to lower costs to consumers, and to be able to stay here. So just as they've trusted us to keep our word in letting this temporary surcharge expire, I'm expecting them to keep theirs with this revenue. But it is much more than this. Ending the temporary surcharge is simply one way we compete for the world's leading companies and at the same time make New Jersey the place where entrepreneurs will want to come to start new ones. From my first day in office, I rejected the false choice that you are either for business or for hardworking families. We can be competitive and more compassionate. A stronger economy builds a fairer New Jersey. And that is how we retain and attract the businesses of the 21st century and beyond, by being strategic, by living our values, and by staying true to our word.
So I was actually expecting a big fight on the CBT surcharge during this budget season. And perhaps I'm reading too much into it, but I was really struck by the governor's statement that he's rejected, quote unquote, rejected the false choice that you are either for businesses or for hardworking families. And I was really struck because I always felt personally that he does or did often imply that you're either for businesses or for working people. So I was very pleased to hear this. Now, Dale, do you think that the governor has moved to the right on business issues? And if so, do you think it's a real change of heart or just an election year move to help Democrats in the legislature?
Listen, I think it was a great line by the governor, right? I mean, I would think any chief executive would want to see balance in their approach to governing, right? You need employers, but you need a good workforce, right? So I think that's what he was saying. I'm not sure that when he came into office and the first couple of years prior to the pandemic, that the business community felt like there was an attempt at balance, right? But again, great line. I think it's a good message for people. And, in terms of whether it was overly political, yes, it's definitely a move for him. But he's a second-term governor, right? Our last governor Chris Christie spent a fair amount of time running for president. Some people have said that that's what this governor is doing. Certainly not on the scale of what Chris Christie did. And, you have a president who hasn't given any indication that he's doing anything else but run. So I think that, the governor is in a position where he is the head of the NGA, National Governors Association, and also the Democratic Governors Association. He holds senior positions there. So he's using that national platform to talk about New Jersey. And, if for some reason President Biden chooses not to run, I think the governor is going to give serious consideration. But if the president does run again, I think at a minimum, this governor wants to be a member of that cabinet, assuming that Biden would win re-election. So, yes, second-term governors in New Jersey do look beyond the borders and take advantage of opportunities. And this governor is no different. And it's understandable. You just want to make sure that, there's people that you're paying enough attention to the home fires. And when you have a good budget situation like he has, it makes it a little bit easier.
And just to add on to that, a follow-up question. Before his budget proposal, what were your thoughts, if you thought about this? Did you expect a fight on the CBT, at least from his end, as far as letting it expire? Were you surprised about? I mean, it's almost like he took the lead on saying that this is going to expire. What do you think? What did you think? What did you expect?
I thought it was going to be hard at a minimum for the legislature to justify it with the level of revenues that were coming in from all areas, including the corporate business tax. And Senate Budget Chairman Paul Sarlo said very early on in the process, I'm trying to think when he first said it, I don't know if it was the end of last year or the very beginning of this year. Yeah, it said that he was not going to support an extension. So that took a lot of wind out of the sails. I know that more recently the Senate president and the speaker made comments at a state chamber of commerce gathering in Atlantic City that they were still taking a look at it. But I think that was my interpretation of that was to maintain some leverage with the governor's office, since the governor's already said that he's not going to ask for a continuation. So I think that was just their attempt to provide some leverage for future negotiations. But I don't think anybody thought this was going to be extended once Senator Sarlo made his pronouncement.
Right. It's kind of interesting that sort of like flipped. You've got the legislature who's now hesitating or pretending to hesitate on letting it expire, and you've got the governor out front saying he does want it to expire. So to me, that was a flip, switching what I expected. So, Rich, do you think sunsetting of the CBT surcharge, and Dale, you may have answered this, sort of at least, do you think the sunsetting of the CBT surcharge will survive the budget negotiation process?
I actually do. I think it was, I don't know what words the governor used, but among other thoughts, we added that surtax because we were running into some revenue problems. And he said it would be temporary, and it was actually extended 1 year beyond what it was. And now I think he's saying fairness is fairness. I said I needed the money. I raised the rate. I don't need the money anymore. I'm following through with what I promised. So I think it was, the right decision to do. The folks on the, way left of center would say, well, we need this money for our program. I think that's a hard argument to make when we're sitting on a $10 billion surplus. We could always use some of that if there are certain programs that need to be increased. And even when we go down to 9%, if we're not number one, we're certainly number two on the highest corporate tax in the country. So from a competitive point of view, you don't want to keep it up at 11.5 when you don't need to. Some of the counter arguments were, well, we're only getting that extra percentage from the very, very, very rich corporations. Well, that's true. But those very rich corporations can also pick up and leave if the environment is such that it creates problems for them. Also, one of the reasons why the rate was increased is because corporations across the country got a big reduction on the federal corp tax. I think from 35% down to 21%, if my memory serves me correctly. So that was part of the justification for increasing the corp tax in New Jersey, was because the federal went down so much. So in total, I agree 100% with Dale. This was the right thing to do. We don't need it for other programs. We don't need it to balance the budget. We don't need it to balance the budget for the next couple of years. And one other point, there are a lot of tax credits and deductions, tax expenditures in the corporate tax code. Maybe one should look at them as to who is getting these benefits, what corporations benefit from the tax reductions and credits that are in the code that perhaps would make the code itself more fair. But that's something that could be addressed, over the next period of years, as I'm sure that would be very difficult to come to grips with which tax expenditures we should get rid of. But I buy in with Dale's observation. This was the right thing to do.
And I agree with both of you. The right thing to do, and I do think it'll survive the budget negotiations. So now the budget proposal includes about $300 million in aid for small businesses, depending on who you talk to, including $50 million in additional funding for the Main Street Recovery Finance Program and $100 million boardwalk fund to support shoretown boardwalks. However, business groups feel the administration has not been as supportive of small businesses as it should be, especially considering the damage that COVID caused. In particular, for the past 3 years, they've been pleading for aid to offset the estimated $1 billion in unemployment insurance hikes that the pandemic will have caused over 3 years. So, Dale, this question is for you. Do you have any thoughts on why, and to me, I think it's a political question, but maybe I'm wrong, any thoughts on why Murphy has been so resistant to providing UI relief? I mean, after all, COVID was not the business's fault, and that's what really, pulled up the unemployment numbers. Many other states have used their federal aid to shore up their UI funds. And, he has undergone a lot of criticism from the business community ever since he became governor. And, putting some money into the UI, I think it would have gone a long way towards, or still could go a long way towards mollifying the business community. So any thoughts on why he has not done it?
Well, you're right, Jeff. The UI support would have gone a long way at a time when that was really the business community's number one request. Arguably, the governor has wanted to maintain his bona fides with I would say the more left portion of his party, and at the time that was a battle cry for the UI support. The governor hadn't really made his turn to closer to the center. I'm not going to call him a centrist at all, but so I think he was still somewhat held hostage by people on the left of his party, and he was also, I think, marshaling resources, not knowing where the end of the pandemic might be. Now, with huge reserves and the future looking bright for the short foreseeable future, I think he feels that he's done enough by announcing his willingness to sunset the corporate tax, as opposed to, and not also add in support for UI. It's interesting, and I think Rich referenced it, that, and I see this with the environmental community, the folks that have been really pushing, the hardline environmental agenda. You could be with the environmental community, or you could be with the social justice people for 99% of their agenda, and if you go against them on one thing, they come out guns blazing. And we saw this very recently on the governor's something that he had proposed on the environmental side that appeared to be too friendly. I think he stood down on some regulations that the industry had some concerns about. And then, certainly for the governor to do UI, to do a corporate sunset, would not please the people that he still sees as a base for him should he seek higher office. So I think the timing was bad, Jeff, in terms of when the business was looking for that UI support, and it hasn't gotten any better because the governor now has said, "Hey, I've tipped my hat to the business community with the sunsetting of the corporate tax."
Right, which I think the business community is, of course, happy about the CBT, but I think my sense is it's still this thing with the unemployment insurance fund, and now there's only 1 year left of the increase, so it would just be a one-shot deal of, I don't know, $300 million. I think it leaves a real sour taste in their mouth, but everything you just said sort of explains why that happened. So as I mentioned earlier, the budget proposal includes a full pension payment, $2.35 billion for debt relief, and a surplus of more than $10 billion. Here's a bit of what the governor had to say about that.
We've embraced a radical philosophy. Pay your debts and don't spend more than you make. Over the past 5 years, we have strengthened our foundation more than any administration in decades, and this budget will continue to reinforce our fiscal standing. And the proof of our renewed foundational strength is evident. In a span of 6 months last year, New Jersey received 3 credit rating upgrades. But I am not ready to stop at 3. So this budget is designed to support the next round of credit upgrades. It is designed to build even greater confidence in our direction and in our ability to honestly meet our obligations. To start, this budget will make the 3rd consecutive full payment into our state pension funds. This budget will also set aside more than $2.3 billion to either pay down existing debt or keep us from taking on new debt entirely. But moreover, this budget will better prepare New Jersey for any national or global economic uncertainty with a surplus of more than $10 billion. And that is that $10 billion is nearly 20% of the entire budget.
So there's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with the surplus. The Republican leadership in response is saying that the proposed $10 billion surplus is too much, that some of it should go back to taxpayers. Meanwhile, on the other end, the state treasurer said the opposite, that the surplus would represent 19% of the budget, which indeed would be the highest percentage allocated to the surplus in 13 years, but it still lags the national average surplus among states of about 25%. Rich, what do you think? Is this surplus too large?
I think not. I would have put some of the surplus into a rainy day fund so that, by definition, if it's in surplus, you could be using it for the next year. If you put it into a rainy day fund, it really locks it up and can't be accessed until there was, quote, a real emergency. Notwithstanding that, if you remember our discussion maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago about the current services projections for the next 3 or 4 years, we'll be able to continue our programs, but we need to have that surplus available to offset some of the rising costs. So I think a lot of people are missing the point that the surplus isn't just for this year. It has to be husband, if you will, for the next few years. And so I think a good surplus at that level is really good. I want to make another point. When we say we have a surplus of X, it is done on proper accounting basis. it is done on a GAAP basis, not a cash basis. Many states, their budget shows a surplus, but it's a cash surplus. And when you look at their financial statements, you'll see they're in a deficit. Not so in New Jersey. We have been forever on a GAAP basis of accounting for our budget, which is really extraordinarily excellent. So we have, even through difficult times, we have ended all years with a balanced budget one way or another, but it's always been on GAAP accounting system. So that's really positive. So I'm not one that says, give the money back now, because 2 years from now, we'll have to say, well, we need to raise taxes again because, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a responsible, it's fortunate that it's that high. And maybe it's even higher because some of that money that we put into this defeasance fund, if I could use it that way, maybe that could be used to offset rise in cost if necessary and not use it to defease bonds. But we can have a further discussion on that. I'm not a big supporter of defeasing a lot of bonds for the sake of saving annual debt service payments. But that's a point of view that we could argue. So I think it's a good surplus that should stay there, and it's available for the next few years.
Thanks, Rich. The Republicans have offered, and I think we may have, well, one of you sort of alluded to this, or alluded to maybe the need for this. The Republicans have offered some major alternatives, including a much revised school funding program. They had a big press conference not too long ago, and it was, as far as I could tell, it was very complicated, but it was a completely new type of school funding program. So, Dale, is that school funding program and some of their other proposals, are they valid and doable, or are they just the usual political out of power party posturing?
Well, I think it's all of that, Jeff. Everything you just said. I would say, but I'm not an elected official, right? But I would say that, school funding formulas, they change over time. The needs change over time. Some of the urban needs aren't what they were 20 years ago. Yet you have communities like Lakewood that have exploded with growth, and the school funding formula doesn't adequately address their needs there. So, but as I said earlier in the program, K through 12 education is the issue for most people in New Jersey, and getting it right is always a concern to elected officials. That's why we haven't had a revised school funding formula since the Corzine administration. I think it might have been 2006, 2007. And so what you have now is a formula that, again, hasn't adjusted for the shifts in population in New Jersey, and school districts are chronically coming up short that actually need the money. And when they don't get the money, it goes the municipal property taxpayers have to pick it up, and that's why the emergency funds that were just approved the other day in the Senate for $100 million. So we need a new school funding formula, but it's going to take a governor who wants to make that change and not worry about running for re-election. And those two things are oxymorons. So, but that's what we need. Otherwise, the politics of education, politics and education are just a toxic mix, and that's what we're going to continue to face.
Right. I didn't think there was much chance for it. So the budget includes $7.1 billion pension payment, which is the actuarially required contribution for the third year in a row. And maybe this is one thing everybody across the spectrum thinks is a good thing, from right to left. So since health benefits are a few more billion, I think it's fair to say that pension and benefits roughly make up about 20% of the budget. So, Rich, the last time I looked, which is either before the pandemic or maybe right at the beginning, I believe our pensions and benefits systems we're in worse shape than just about any other state. So is that still true? And just what are the numbers for the state's unfunded pension and health benefit obligations?
Here's some quick observations. First on the pension and then on the health benefits. So currently we're about 54% funded. So theoretically, we're still underfunded. But we have been putting the money back in based upon what the actuary says we should put in each year. And if you look at, I just pulled up a schedule that was in the last official statement issued by the state. And if you look at that, you'll see that for the next 25 years, it assumes that we'll continue about $7.1 billion each year to about the year 2049, and then we'll be fully funded. So there's no expectation based upon current views by the actuary that we're going to be able to A, reduce the pension system, nor are we going to be required to increase funding. So one should assume that over the next 20 years, if we want to have a funded pension system, we need to continue at about that $7.1 billion that we have a fully funded. And I just digress for a second. I don't think it makes too much difference whether we're 70%, 80%, or 100%. The goal is always to be 100%. Most states aren't anywhere near that. We may be at the low end of the spectrum, but have been approaching sanity. On the health benefits, it is not funded on an actuarial basis. Our healthcare system is totally present day funding. Whatever we need that year, we put in, even though the out year costs are increasing for those people who enter the retirement, because the state covers a large portion of retirement costs for state employees and teachers. Remember, the pension system for retirees also covers the teachers as well as state employees. So the health benefits program is also underfunded substantially if you look at it in the same context as the pension system. But it is on a pay-as-you-go basis. And those numbers will increase each year. I don't know what level it's at now, quite frankly. I didn't check, but I think we put in about $2.5 to $3 billion a year for state employees and for the teachers. So that's my take on it. I assume we'll continue funding at the level that's been settled on at the present day.
So, Rich, I think you gave me enough information there to answer the question I was just going to ask you. So I'll make this question into a statement, and you tell me if you think I got it right, if I understood you right. Even though it's a good thing that we're paying, the full actuarially required payment, and we've done it 3 years in a row, that is not going to bring the pension and healthcare benefits to a halt, because we're still going to have to put a big chunk of the budget into those programs. So it's not just a short-term fix that now that we've done it 3 years in a row and we've reached the full payment, like things will be glorious from now and it'll start going down. So we're pretty much, if I understood you right, we want to head towards the fiscally responsible thing. We're talking about doing $7 billion, at least on the pension side, for until 2050 or whatever you said. Did I interpret you correctly?
Right on target. And that assumes, of course, that the employee continues to make their contribution, which in the aggregate today is about $1.7 billion. So that's good. And we assume that the interest earnings on that money that we're putting in there is earning the amount of the money that was estimated. So yes, I agree 100% with the way you phrased it.
Okay. So I have a question
you get
from
an A.
Yeah, well, that's, I really should take one of your classes. The more I do this show with you and Dale, the better I get at this. So I have a question from our audience. Governor Murphy said the Silicon Valley Bank collapse was a sign, quote, that there may be even more tough times ahead for the national and state economies. Will Murphy's budget proposal do you think be adjusted to plan for that scenario? And I guess what that question means is, do you think they're going to account for that in making the projections perhaps less than they thought, and putting in more items to adjust for what may be a worse scenario than the original thoughts? What do you say, Rich?
No. I think whatever's in there now will not be affected at all by what's going on in the banking industry. However, what some impacts could be, absent that, but just the overall economy of the country, is the pension funds, as to whether they'll be able to earn the money that they have earned in the last few years. I'm sure the overall economy is impacting the rate of return on our pension system. But I would say that's a whole different issue. And I don't think whatever's happening in the California or other parts of the country banking is going to impact the state budget at all.
Rich, I agree with you on that. Do I get another A, I hope?
I think so.
Okay, so and we sort of touched on this before, but the Anchor Property Tax Relief Program, which provides rebates to homeowners and tenants, will cost $2 billion this year. And I don't, maybe I mentioned this before, but I don't see how this kind of funding can last for more than a year or two. Rich, what do you think?
A couple of thoughts. One, if you go back to our comment about the current services projection, those projections assumed that this program would continue. So depending upon the economy and the revenue, we could be good for 3 years. And then at that point, we're going to have a problem. So, and I have a little bit, this is just a personal view. I would not have funded property tax relief in this way. Lots of ways of doing it. I buy into the circuit breaker concept that says you pay no more in property taxes than a certain percentage of your income. So if you made, for example, $75,000, you would pay, for example, no more than 5% on property tax. So if you were in a high property tax community, you would benefit from it. And I think that approach focuses more on those folks who can't afford property tax. For example, I'm going to get a rebate under the Anchor program. Thank God I don't need it. Now, I'm not going to send it back. I'm going to do something creative with it. But there are other folks out there who really do need it. And for the sake of being, I think, more political, we're going to disperse that property tax relief all across the state. Where I think you should center it on those folks who really need it, where their income is below the relationship between their income and the property tax. Now, I recognize other people that have different points of view that says, well, I pay my property taxes, I should get a rebate. Well, I buy into the difference, but people can disagree.
What about you, Dale? Do you think this is, I know what you're going to say, but do you think they're going to keep funding this thing?
I mean, it's always going to be the challenge, Jeff. I mean, it's listen, I happen to agree with Rich. I mean, there are people that need this kind of support. But that's the political aspect of it. Like, what level of income, who should get it. And what you're seeing is a very political budget by just a significant jump in the program. You have to go back to the last gubernatorial election, which was very close in the scheme of things, certainly a lot closer than anybody expected. And the Democrats lost seats in the legislature. So they're mindful coming into this next cycle. They have redistricting, right? Everybody's running in a slightly adjusted district. Some got better districts, others not so much. So they have to appeal to new people. And the turnout is going to be historically low. We're in that fourth year of the 4-year cycle where the top of the ticket is your state legislator. So low turnout can be a problem for incumbents of both parties. So what you see here is an oversized anchor program with the goal of reminding people that, their legislator is taking care of them. So I don't think it's not a favorite program of mine, because exactly for what Rich says. It's now gotten beyond where it needs to be, and it's taking care of people that might not necessarily need it. No offense, Rich, but you said it, I didn't. But you're going to use the money creatively. But there is a need for something like this, but not for as big as it's gotten.
Yeah, actually, I was shocked when it was released last year at how big it was and how it went all the way up to 200,000 or whatever the income limit is. I'm not sure if I have that right. 250. I mean, I was absolutely shocked. I thought it would be more, targeted, like you were saying, Rich. So, Dale, I would like to ask you a few political questions. You're our political guru here. Well, I guess first, do you think the legislature is going to make any significant changes to this proposed budget?
Unlikely. I think where the changes, or at least the pressure for changes, will occur will be to add things. The governor's been, pretty good on pushing back. Typically, you have a number of the total budget, and there's a lot of rearranging of numbers internally. But the governor will face a lot of pressure. We've seen more and more, again, because of the largesse, we've seen more and more asks for things that you might not have seen 8 or 9 years ago, certainly in the Christie administration, because they didn't have money. And same thing with the Corzine administration. They were on hard times in terms of money. But you'll see the request to fix the firehouse and the Little League field and those kinds of things that we haven't seen in a while. So that's where the pressure will come from. Whether the governor acquiesces or not, we'll certainly find out.
Small things around the edges. So, second one.
Small things, Jeff, but to a legislator running for re-election, getting that firehouse fixed can be a big thing. So.
Right. No, that's true. All politics are local, right? Tip O'Neill, if I recall correctly, for you young people, former Speaker of the House of Representatives. Long time ago. So, here's my next one for you, Dale. Do you think, we talked about the UI fund, and the business community is still pushing that hard. Do you think the business community will be able to persuade the legislature to add extra money for the UI trust fund and or other small business aid? And I asked this thinking that I believe last year they did pass a bill to help out with the unemployment insurance fund, and it got all the way through the assembly and was posted for a vote on the Senate floor. And the scuttlebutt is the governor's office basically called up and said, well, there's no way we're going to sign that. So do you think the legislature is going to push on that this year to try and please the business community?
I think there'll be some effort, Jeff, but I see it falling short. There's a big difference between helping a company with its unemployment insurance obligation versus putting $1,500 to $2,000 in somebody's pocket. I just, helping the business community is somewhat monolithic. Like, what is it? There's also other issues. This might be at the top of the list, but there are other issues that typically the business community, that broad term of what that is typically asking for. So I'd be very surprised if that was included in this year's budget.
Jeff, I have an observation.
Thank you. Let's hear it, Rich.
The $2.5 cut related to the corp tax benefited a very small group of corporations, whereas the UI is going to benefit a heck of a lot of corporations, small business, medium size. So there's two different groups that are being addressed. So to suggest that I did one thing, therefore it abrogates my need to do the other, is not consistent. So I don't know what the magic number is, but I personally, from a left of center guy, would say we should put some assistance in there. I don't know what the number is. I think I heard $1 billion of unemployment insurance shortfall, but I'm not sure. So, and we still have some federal money that has not been allocated. And it's one-time money, just as this would be one-time money. So I think it would be appropriate to put some money into the unemployment insurance fund from the state in one way, shape, or form. Maybe not fully funding it, but something, because it is different in nature than the 2.5% cut. That's my 2 cents on it.
No, I agree with you, Rich. And actually, I think there could have been a civil war of sorts, and maybe there still will be in the business community of those who would benefit more from the UI relief, saying, well, give us money and take it away from the CBT surcharge, which, generally benefits bigger businesses. But hopefully we won't have such a civil war. So, Dale, another political question. The business community asserts, and for a long time, that pension and benefits reform is critical to the state's fiscal health. My question is, with this governor so close to the unions and his ideological commitment to their cause, do you think we'll ever see any significant reforms in those areas while he's in office?
Not at all. I mean, there's very few certainties in politics, but I think this might be one of them. I just don't see it, Jeff. There's nothing else to say. He's been very supportive. Been very supportive of him, and that's different than the environmental community, right? State employees, public employees. If he had no other base of support, that's the one he's very much dependent upon. So don't see any reform in the future of this administration.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought too. I get another A. I don't. Those unions are the political troops, the backbones, the way I look at it, of his support. So, Dale, I hate to keep asking you.
You also notice following up on Dale's observations, the attempt by Senator Sweeney to make some pretty good changes to the pension system. It went nowhere. So I agree with Dale. It's going to go nowhere.
So, Dale, another political crystal ball question this time. So, as you know, all 120 seats in the legislature are up for election in November. Currently, the Democrats have comfortable majorities in both houses, 25-15 in the Senate and 46-34 in the Assembly. So how do you think they'll do in the elections? And I know that half a year is a lifetime in politics. Do you think they're going to lose seats, gain seats, stay the same? Any thoughts on that?
Jeff, too early to tell. As I mentioned before, they're running in new legislative districts. Not dramatic, but, there are some adjustments. And some would say that there was some of the changes will benefit a couple of Republicans. I think, if we're talking in the context of a business community and advancing a pro-business agenda, picking up a Republican seat or two in either house can make a big difference. It's something dramatic would have to change, would have to happen for the Republicans to take one house. But even if they went from 34 to 36, so that it's 44-36, or if you picked up one seat, and I think you have the 25-15 because Sam Thompson moved over to the Democrats. because it might have been 24-16 before Sam moved over there. But in any case, even if you picked up one seat in the Senate, it brings it all that much closer. And there are always somebody in the majority party that might be willing to make a deal so that on some big issues, like a UI bill or something, you might be able to generate enough votes in cooperation with the Republicans to make something happen. But if there's any change, it'll be incremental one way or the other.
Okay, that makes sense. So I've got questions, several from the audience. A bunch of our attendees are asking why the state didn't put more resources into the homestead rebate instead of creating the new anchor program. And I don't personally know if that's political or there's some other reason for it. Dale, do you have any thoughts?
I think it was a branding thing. I mean, Rich might have some more technical insight, but I think it was more of a branding thing. The governor wanted to create his program. Homestay rebate sounds kind of 1970s, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it was really branding and optics to make it sound like something new, fresh. So.
Rich, any thoughts on that?
I think the anchor program is better than the homestead rebate program, and neither are as good as a circuit breaker program. So if the governor was going to make a change, I wish he would have done it along the lines of a circuit breaker, but that is probably not as politically beneficial to him.
Yeah, but Rich, politics really shouldn't be important, right?
Of course
Just
not.
kidding.
It all should be pure finance, right?
Right. So we're approaching the end of our broadcast. So let me ask each of you for your closing thoughts about the budget and anything we might not have covered today. Rich, let's start with you.
Back to my first comments in the beginning, a good balanced budget. No trick. Well, there's always a little bit, but no trickery in this budget. The revenue estimates are good. They're greater than the expenditure projections. That's good. Plenty of surplus. Modest spending increases. Responsible revenue estimates, and providing relief to corporations to some degree, and expanding programs for the less fortunate. So, gotta give them a minus at least, in my judgment.
Thank you, Rich. What are your closing thoughts, Dale?
Just, the political observation, certainly that, Governor presented a budget that, he can say that it's not raising taxes. Seems to cover all the bases that he wants to cover programmatically. It's one that the legislature, the majority party Democrats can go back home and say that, we're maintaining services. And in fact, for many of you, you'll put more money in your pocket. So it's a great election year budget for people. And you'll hear the usual arguments from the Republicans that spending has increased too much, that we need to put more money, back in everybody's pocket. And it'll be, the Democrats' recent add of $100 million plus to the K through 12 budget will blunt the argument made by Republicans back in their home districts that they're getting shortchanged from a school funding standpoint. The formula is still a problem. This is just a temporary fix, but it will have an impact and won't allow the Republicans to claim that they're not getting enough in terms of school funds. So, the typical political arguments will continue, Jeff, but the governor will dodge another one, based on the largesse that the state's been able to accrue.
Yeah, I guess it's always easier and more fun to have a lot of revenues coming in, as opposed to what all the prior years I can ever remember, except for maybe the Kane years, where just the opposite. Every $1 million seemed to matter a lot. So Well, Rich Dale, as always, I've learned a lot from you. I got an A, right, Rich? So, an A on one question. And I am sure our members have as well. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I look forward to doing this again a year from now. So thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. We enjoyed it.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. Rich, good to be with you.
Likewise, Dale. Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
And thanks to everyone for watching, and have a great day.